And welcome everybody to Wound Care Gurus Facebook Live. Excited to have you guys on with us tonight. We have an exciting opportunity tonight to speak with Dr. Thomas Serena from the Serena Group, and we've got some very interesting topic. I know many of you have obviously posted that you liked the idea of what we're going to talk about. You know, it's kind of been an area I've been quite passionate about, as many of you all know. It's kind of an area that I'm very well outspoken about. So I am glad that you have all tuned in tonight. A couple of quick little housekeeping. I want to give you an update. Sharp debridement classes for the fall. We are finalizing dates right now as we speak, but the class locations for this fall will be in Richmond, Virginia, Los Angeles, California, Chicago, Illinois, Dallas, Texas, and Denver, Colorado. There's a possibility we may add some more classes. We'll just kind of see how things go. But I just wanted to let you all know that's kind of where things are at with the Sharps class. So other than that, we got tonight's topic is on the truth about sodium hypochlorite. And Dr. Serena is going to be here discussing a kind of an FDA type study that he and his organization have been working on it roughly for about the past year. He'll fill us in on the details. So what I'm going to do here real quick is I am going to bring Dr. Serena on with us. Hey, Dr. Serena, how are you this evening?
Fabulous.
Excellent.
Looking forward to the discussion.
Terrific. Somehow I got my screen swapped here. Just hold on a second. I got to move us back around. There we go. So technically, I always got to be a little glitch in here since, this is not I'm not the top tech expert out there in the digital world. We kind of fly by the seat of our pants here, but we have a great time doing it. So anyways, we and I were talking before, so you're down in Houston, a little warm, I think you said down there. So are you down there, I assume, on business?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of business here in Texas, and it's a great place to be right now.
Excellent. Yeah, hot. So why don't we just kind of roll right into it, Dr. Serena? So why don't you, for our audience sake, because they don't know who you are, like I kind of got to know you and kind of, know a fair amount about your background. How would you give our audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I am still a board certified general surgeon, and I don't anymore. My practice is my entire practice is wound care, the care of patients with chronic wounds. We have there's three different things that I do. We help hospitals run outpatient departments, wound clinics, and we have a number of those across the United States. We have a number of freestanding centers across the U.S., and more of those coming online as we speak. And then we also have a foundation that does research. And we do about 8 to 9 plus clinical trials every year. We're going to talk about one of our clinical trials today on this interview. And looking forward to I always like talking about our research. That's
sure. Awesome. So obviously, how about giving us a little background on kind of what is the mission of Serena Group Research Foundation? I know you're wound care based, but what's kind of your general mission and what you hope to accomplish with your organization?
So there's two real goals. One is to on the wound care side is to standardize wound care across the United States, and we are a physician-run company, and we want to get wound care functioning like other medical specialties, where everyone pretty much follows the standard algorithms and deliver the best care. So that's one, and we help hospitals do that. Although I think most hospitals will bring us on because of our reimbursement support and other things like that. Sure. However, the foundation is really dedicated to the science of wound healing, and so we conduct clinical trials that are sponsored by the government. We got a grant from the government of Canada, of all places. That's great. And then industry sponsored trials, and we sponsor some of our own trials as well, particularly when it comes to quality initiatives. And we do a number of quality initiatives in our centers and other centers that want to work with us. We're fairly inclusive when it comes to research.
Excellent. So obviously, outside of what we're going to discuss tonight, How about, what kind of research has your organization done so far in the wound care realm?
So we've done 100 wound care trials
Oh,
since
wow.
2000. Probably 20 diabetic foot ulcer trials, a lot of venous leg. We've done some more recently, some really fun pressure ulcer clinical trials. We have one that just finished, another one just starting on pressure ulcers. We do burn research, and then we do a lot of volunteer research as well, where we're doing early phase. We take students and give them wounds and see what happens with a variety of different modalities.
Sure. Excellent. Excellent. So we'll just kind of skip and cut right to the chase then. So, what is the current research that you hang on before I answer that? I just want to let our listening audience know at any point if you have any questions for Dr. Serena about what he's doing and the information he presents tonight. Please, like I said, just type it in the chat box and I will make sure I pass that question on to Dr. Serena tonight. So anyway, so Doc, getting back to you. So what is the current research that your organization is working on?
So at present, we have the trial. We just finished the trial. Actually, it's still ongoing that we're going to talk about tonight. We actually we decided in consultation with the sponsor to continue with that trial. So and when you see the results, you'll know why. It's really pretty amazing. And we have a diabetic foot ulcer trial, a couple of venous leg ulcer trials, actually 2 diabetic foot ulcer trials, and then a number of diagnostic trials. We do a lot of work in the diagnostic realm. You'll see one of the diagnostics that we did a lot of research on, the Moleculite procedure.
Okay, sure. I'm very familiar with it. We've actually had we've had interviews with the Moleculite company, as well as some different clinicians have been using that product. So
super. I think people that use it really like it a lot. But we did all the original clinical trials for that device, and so that was, and that's been ongoing. We're doing a number of other research products there. So our research spans anything that's wound care related, soft tissue infections, scarring, burns. If it's something that won't heal, then we're interested.
Excellent. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the current study, that you've been working, and I guess, like you said, has been now extended, because that's kind of what we want to, as my passion in wound care. I mean, I've been doing this for a quarter of a century now, as most of my audience knows. I am all about evidence-based in what I practice, what I preach. My wife the same way, which is kind of why we started Wound Care Gurus, is because I'm sure you're well aware there's a lot of stuff, too much of it, out there in wound care today that really lacks any evidence. The evidence is, well, we've been doing it for years and I've seen it work. Well, that's not really evidence, But, they continue with these old habits that, they think they saw results, but they really didn't do a true study that would have eliminated all the other factors that may have created the same outcome. That anecdotal evidence type of thing, which, doesn't carry a ton of weight in real, true evidence-based treatment approaches. If you base all of your practice on anecdotal evidence, you're going to be running off the reservation a lot. And I know that's kind of your background, is you're really focused on finding what the evidence is, looking at the research, and seeing what's out there. So this topic of sodium hypochlorite is obviously a highly debated and discussed area out there. It's one that, again, my listening audience is well aware of my position on it. And, I've done presentations on antimicrobials and researched the research and found that a lot of these antimicrobials, on the surface, they seem to be antimicrobial, but they really lack any legit evidence that they actually work when you introduce them into a dirty chronic wound environment. And I know that's kind of what we're going to talk tonight about, sodium hypochlorite in its different versions. Because as the title says, not everything is Dakins.
True. Yeah, that's true. And I think that's an important distinction. What the product that we tested is often compared to Dakins because of the similar chemical formulas, but it's clearly just like a dexamethasone iodine is not iodine or betadine. as not all the sodium hypochlorite preparations are the same.
Right.
And clearly, if you have the right mixture, you'll be able to do some good rather than harm.
Sure.
And I think one of the reasons for the clinical trial is to see if the antiseptics we are using are really working. So for the last 10 years plus, I have been doing diagnostic clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do diagnostic clinical trials looking at bacterial load and bacteria wounds, you realize that some treatments don't do what they say they do. I mean,
Sure.
the bacterial load doesn't go down when you use those products,
right. Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that in numerous cases. And sometimes the antimicrobial is in the dressing, so that the dressing doesn't become a petri dish, and doesn't,
Right.
and that's fine.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. But a lot of practitioners use some of those dressings to reduce the bacterial burden in the wound, which they don't.
Right, exactly.
So we mentioned the Moleculite earlier when you and I were talking, and we have that tool now. We validated that tool by testing it against quantitative tissue culture biopsies. So now we use that to help us to interrogate a number of different antiseptics. And the nice thing about antiseptics in this particular case is we were able to do a double blind. So the patients and the practitioners, nurses had no idea whether they were getting saline or sodium hypochlorite. So, and again, one of the weaknesses of the trials that I do, that my group does, is that it's very hard to blind these trials. If you've got a placental product, or you've got some other similar product, you can't have a placebo, because if you do, the chances that you'll harm the patient. So you can't do that.
Right,
So
exactly.
so you have to compare those to standard of care, but there's always that worry that not having a double blind clinical trial design might introduce bias. So in this trial, we were fortunate. One of our really sharp nurses put together a regimen on how to blind it, and we did that. So because there's when you mix sodium hypochlorite at first, there's a little chlorine smell. A little chlorine is produced, small amount, and you smell it. And so obviously saline doesn't smell like that. So, but the way we did it is we designed a way so that the containers smell like a pool, not the stuff in the containers, the outside of the containers. So you couldn't tell. So,
I like that.
Yes.
Well, again, I think what you're doing is great, because when you look at a lot of the body of evidence in wound care, there is very little RCTs and double-blind studies on anything, because they're just so hard to do.
Sure.
So I applaud you for coming up with a creative way to do this. So I'm excited to hear more about it. So go ahead, continue.
Well, no, I got to give credit to the team, because they're really the ones that came up with this idea, and they're very resourceful, to say the least. So so we had a double blind study, which means that we had no idea what we were cleansing the wound with, and then we used the Moleculite device. And let me just back up a little and talk briefly about that. Mm-hmm. It's a device that shines a violet light on the wound at 405 nanometers. That's really violet. It's not ultraviolet, but close.
Right.
And when the porphyrins in the bacteria, or if it's Pseudomonas, the pyroviridines in the bacteria, are excited, they emit a color of their own. And so regular bacteria, that's red. Mm-hmm. And in Pseudomonas, it's a cyan or a white color. So, and it's validated. So I can now take an image, a fluorescence image, and then I can cleanse the wound, and I can cleanse the wound on a weekly basis, and I can follow wound healing, which is what we did.
Right.
And we looked at images, mm-hmm. and to look at bacterial reduction. So we were able to follow bacterial reduction, and just as importantly, wound healing. We used a surrogate endpoint of 40% wound healing in 4 weeks. And that was the one we chose. It was all comers. We didn't, the inclusion exclusion criteria were wide open. Sure. This is a real world type situation. We didn't eliminate anybody. So you basically, do you have a wound that's been there for 4 weeks, and you're willing to consent and be treated with it in this clinical trial? Yes, okay. You're in. So it was a very straightforward, real world type design, but it's still double blinded RCT. Although what we're presenting today is really the pilot version of it,
Sure.
because it's only.
So how many
first.
patients do you think were in your roughly in the whole in the study, in the trial? Do you think you had?
So there were in the first set there were 16, and
Okay.
that's we meant it as a pilot. We designed it that way, and we after we saw the results, we decided to continue the clinical trial.
Right.
But before that, we were going to stop at 16 and you just look, see if there's any adverse events, see if we can actually reduce his bacterial burden, and look and see if an antiseptic actually promotes healing. Because there really isn't a lot of evidence in an RCT fashion for antiseptics healing. There's some for topical antimicrobials. Cadexarianone has a trial, but there's not really anything in a trial type format for any of the antiseptics. And I'd like to do this for all the antiseptics. It'd be great. But we stopped at 16 and decided to later on, and we're just in the process of submitting the publication now. But after we got it done, I said, we can't stop. We got to continue because the results are very, very good. And
excellent.
So I'll jump into the results. So, and then I think we're going to show some pictures too. Sure. But, so we had 16 patients and there was over a 70% better healing rate in the arm treated with sodium hypochlorite. It was dramatic. It was, wow. And in almost every case, within 4 weeks, we were able to eliminate the bacterial load. Now, the molecular device will detect bacteria at greater than 10 to the fourth CFUs per gram. So, and that's the amount that inhibits wound healing.
Sure, right.
So obviously, if you're going to get the wound jump started and get going, you need to get that amount of bacteria decreased. And we were really clearly able to demonstrate that sodium hypochlorite not only promotes healing, but also reduces bacterial burden. Of course, those go hand in hand, right, Bill? I mean, it makes sense, right? I'm not saying anything people don't know. Sure. If I decrease the bacterial burden, then obviously I'm going to promote healing, but I think it's important to show both, and that's our primary endpoint was reduction in healing, which is really very dramatic. I don't know if you want to show some of the pictures; they're pretty.
Sure. Which one do you want me to put up first? You tell me. I'll pop it up.
Yeah. Why don't you just start at the beginning? There's not that many, and we'll just go through them.
Well, I know this is what the name of the double blind right here, correct? So
you got to have a long name, right? Because that makes that makes the trial better. That's a nice long name.
Okay. So it reminds me, there's a web news thing out there. I think it's the Daily News or the Daily or something, but they don't even need to write an article because their titles of their articles are like 1,000 words long.
Yeah. Well, the journal will probably shorten that, but we'll submit it that long anyway.
So here's one of them that you gave me. So.
Right. So this is a plain image of a patient, and this is the patient we're going to follow today on this call. And you can see when the patient came in, they've got sort of this slough that covers the wound. This is a venous leg ulcer. All of us have seen this a million times. So we cleaned up the ulcer up. We cleansed it, and now so for those first 16 patients, by the way, I know now what they were treated. This patient was treated sodium hypochlorite. Now, until I opened the blind after the 16th patient, I had no idea what they were being treated with. So debrided, and you can look at the next slide, and you can see that even after the debridement,
you're looking at the second picture here.
No, the next
slide.
Pictures, yeah.
This one.
Here you go. So you can see, Bill, you can see red there, right? If you've seen this before. So so the way it worked is that we would get a post debridement and wash image most of the time, and in fact, it's only about less than 20% of the time. Let's just say it that way. Less than 20% of the time, debridement and antiseptics will take the burden below 10 to the fourth. It was really an eye opener for me because I had to bet money that if you debrided something and you put a good antiseptic on it, that the bacteria would go below 10 to the fourth after one visit. And I was wrong. Certainly not the first time. I won't be the last. I will tell you the clinical trials are humbling, to say the least. Very humbling. Because things I stood up on podiums and said 5 years ago now, I have to walk back some of those statements.
Well, this is one. Doc, you're in good company here because I can look back and I've been teaching wound care on a national level for 18 years, and doing wound care for 25 plus. And, some of the stuff I learned early on the day, and even that I was teaching in the early part of my career. And then I've, done some research and looked into it and changed. I'm like, well, what I taught years ago is not what I should have been teaching. So I know the feeling.
Exactly. So so you can see there's red on this. Obviously, there's bacteria. I've already debrided this one. I've already cleansed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the red fluorescence indicates more than 10 to the fifth. And then at that point, we randomized the patients to get sodium hypochlorite and standard of care, which was, in this case, compression, whatever the standard of care was for that particular ulcer type. And then, or normal saline. And then the patients were given that to take home. Patients were blinded too. And then they came back to clinic for evaluations on a weekly basis. And I'm going to show you this patient at 4 weeks on the next slide. And you can see complete closure now in 4 weeks. That's pretty good. It's pretty amazing, actually. So they all didn't close in 4 weeks. That's not. I'm really not trying to say that. But what happened was, you can see that we reduced that bacterial burden pretty substantially. And I don't have the 2 week slides in here. I wish I put them in. But the 2 week slides show that about 2 weeks, the redness really is, on the peri-wound skin, but not in the wound bed. But it was the wound itself that no longer had that red fluorescence. And then we just had to scrub. You can see it's got all this flaky stuff on the skin. So trying to scrub all that off, that really harbors bacteria. But there's nothing in the wound. And at 4 weeks, the patient was completely closed. And when you look at this, there was as I said before, 73% more rapid healing, greater healing in the sodium hypochlorite arm as compared to this saline arm, and really dramatic. In fact, with only 16 patients, we came within a hair's breadth of getting statistical significance. I mean, really came close, which is shocking. I mean, that's amazing. And it was at that point that I called I called the sponsor of the trial out. I guess I can say it.
Because people are going to be wondering, what is this sodium hypochlorite product that we're talking about?
So so Anacap is the sponsor of the trial. They're the ones that reached out to me and sponsored, paid for the trial, and through that unrestricted grant. And at that point, I called them and I said, hey. We just broke the blind, and you're not going to believe this. It's really pretty dramatic response. And we had done the statistics on it. I said, I think we should keep enrolling because, if we keep enrolling, you're going to hit statistical significance, and you will have a double-blind, randomized controlled trial showing your antiseptic reduces bacterial burden and promotes wound healing with a 4-week surrogate endpoint, and no one else has that.
Right.
I mean, this will be the first time an antiseptic has that kind of evidence behind it, true evidence base. Evidence that we use for our CTPs and negative pressure, really strong evidence.
Right.
So,
no, I think any
that's
product
really exciting.
One would think that any product would want to have that kind of evidence to back their stuff up, and obviously, with the Antisept product, if the trial goes as it has shown in the early results, that if that continues to have that type of solid clinical evidence, it's going to be really hard to refute it, by any of the other types of products out there, unless they're willing to step up their game and do the same thing.
Right. So that's the next steps, right? So I think that if you're out there selling an antiseptic at this point, you're going to have to do a trial. So that's how we started doing trials in the beginning. We needed them for reimbursement, we needed them for FDA, but we also needed them to say, look, I got this product, and I'm going to prove to you, to the wound specialists out there that it works. Mm-hmm. You and I are on the same page on this. If you don't have a clinical trial, you have a product.
Right. Yeah.
But for the most part,
you can have all the in vitro studies you want. But as I like to tell my students when I teach, I'm like, how often do you treat a wound inside of a bottle?
Yeah. In vitro studies and preclinical work is really important. It helps guide us to where we're going.
Right.
But your bottle doesn't look anything like my wound.
Exactly.
That is a very complex environment. It's chaotic. It's full of it's full of proteases and bacteria and inflammation. And just because something performs well at a benchtop does not mean it's going to perform well.
Exactly.
In when you get it. I don't know how many products we've seen over the years that have done fabulously well in phase 2, only to completely fall on their face in phase 3 in some of these drug trials. Mm-hmm. So that's why we test them. And I think that this, I think that the sodium hypochlorite, the Antiseptics, as you mentioned, is the trade name, is going to set the standard now for what should be done to demonstrate that there's evidence for its use. I think because the antiseptics are, they're not as expensive as the cellular and tissue-based products, right? So sure. We've kind of given them a pass over the years,
right?
Gotcha. And some of the topical antimicrobials, same thing. Give them a pass because the theory makes sense, but they're not terribly expensive products. So we're going to give them a pass. But I just think those days are over. If we're going to join mainstream medicine as woundologists, and we have to have evidence for what we do.
Sure.
So.
And I see it often on the, you got to look for it on the fine print on a lot of products out there, but they'll often have that disclaimer that says, in vitro studies do not necessarily correlate with clinical efficacy. But of course they don't put that in big bold print. They put that in really small fine print, and a lot of clinicians, as I always, when I'm teaching my clinicians in my courses, is I say, you guys, you got to do your due diligence on your product. I mean, a 30-minute sales presentation, there's nothing wrong with that. I did sales for about 4.5 years, just part-time, trying to dip my toe in another area of wound care. So I've been on pretty much both sides of the fence. And you got to read the fine print. There's a reason why the FDA requires those disclaimers put into their literature, because clinicians need to know it. But, a company, when they're doing a presentation, obviously is not going to highlight the disclaimers. They're going to highlight the key things that are sellable, because a disclaimer is hard to sell. And if you hope, to some extent, if you hope that your audience doesn't bother to look any deeper than the sales presentation, then you got a solid sale. But if they do their due diligence, which is what I've been promoting, to read everything, get their studies if they have them, and read them all. Don't just be like, hey, great sales talk, I'll take a case of that stuff. That's really not doing your due diligence on a product. And there's obviously incredibly great products in the market today. But sure, there is also some out there that you got to put a big question mark around and say, is it really what they say it is?
And I would give kudos, and I want to give kudos to Anna Kappa. And I don't, just so you know, I don't have anything to disclose. I did research for them. So right. I did research for a lot of companies. So, but they, we didn't know. I have to tell you that more than once I've said, I wonder if soap and water or saline work just as well as all these antiseptics on the market, and we didn't really know. Mm-hmm. And the trial could have turned out the other way around, right? Sure. Mm-hmm. It could have turned out that it didn't work as well as saline, and that would have been, and that takes some guts. And I really applaud. I really applaud companies that take the time and spend the money, because trials aren't cheap either.
Sure. Right.
Take the time and spend the money to prove. To get evidence base, to get an evidence base that works, and then and that drives. And look, that raises the bar for everyone else.
Sure.
So once you start getting, and as a specialty wound care, we got to have this, right? We need to have evidence for everything we do. So I really think that this is they were brave enough to take the first step.
Right.
In this process, and that's kudos to Anna Kappa.
Excellent. So while we're on this whole talk about sodium hypochlorite, because that's really, because there are a number of companies out there that have, either a sodium hypochlorite, hypochlorous acid. why is it that everyone seems to think that any product that you drop sodium hypochlorite in is by default Dakins or some version of it? And is there really a difference from one sodium hypochlorite product to another? And if you can expound on why there is a difference, because I mean, obviously I've done my research and I understand the chemistry and know that there is. But for my audience sake, instead of listening to Bill sit on his soapbox, let's have Dr. Serena, give us your impression, and maybe you completely prove me wrong. Hey, I'm willing to throw it out there on a limb, put my reputation at stake. But like I said, why is it that everybody thinks sodium hypochlorite is just Dakins, no matter how however you package it, and is there really a difference?
Yeah, so the problem is most of us in wound care aren't chemists. I'm not. I don't claim to be.
Right.
And I'm guilty of that as well. I think that when we hear sodium hypochlorite, think Dakins. Dakins obviously is a very it's toxic. It's very high concentration of chlorine.
Yep.
But as I said previously, that's not the way for example, we tested Antiseptic in this particular, and it's a modified sodium hypochlorite, and it produces enough killing chlorine to kill bugs without killing the patient. And it's analogous, again, as I said before, to cadexamar iodine versus betadine. We don't put betadine on wounds, but cadexamar iodine is effective and it's safe.
Right.
Same thing with Antiseptic. It's sodium hypochlorite. It's effective, and it's safe, and now we know from the clinical trial that it's incredibly effective, and obviously we had no adverse events in the clinical trial, so it wasn't damaging the surrounding skin or anything of that nature. And in addition, the healing rates were really phenomenal. These are healing rates we see with advanced wound care products.
Okay.
And not saying antiseptics aren't advanced, but typically we put them in the category of wound bed preparation.
Sure. Right.
So, but it's amazing to see that. So I think you have to be really careful, when you're looking at the chemistry of these various products. Hypochlorous acid is a very similar product. It's different chemically, but it is there's some, again, in vitro evidence that that's effective. A number of folks that use it. I think what I'd like to see is this kind of clinical trial for that as well.
Right.
And
sure.
and I don't know. I honestly don't know what the results will be. I think for the most part, what I can speak to is the results that we got in our trial.
Right.
In that case, I can tell you that in the antiseptic world, Antisept is extraordinarily effective and in reducing bacteria and in promoting healing. So it's hopefully we'll see more and more of these trials done with other antiseptics, other topical antimicrobials. Especially now we have the molecular device, and they're easier to do.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's a lot easier to assess these different products. Why? That's why I'm just like, one of my questions has always been, okay, we've got this real simple and easy way to prove whether or not your product works in wounds. Why isn't everybody just getting one and finding somebody who can do an independent study, to make sure that they can just prove it? To me, it's kind of a no-brainer, but I'm simple like that. So
yeah, I think it's really up to us, because as I tell the students in our courses and in our our woundologists in our centers, if you continue to use products without clinical evidence, there will never be any clinical evidence. It's really up to us. And we try to do as best we can. Right. We try to focus on products that have clinical evidence. So, the old value proposition is,
sure.
The way we've modified that for wound care is clinical evidence and reimbursement, and value is a combination of those two. Obviously, clinical evidence having more weight, but and if manufacturing, they've been doing this for 100 years, right? We're just coming on to the wound care. We're just coming on to the value idea, but it's really important. It's important because if we want to see more clinical evidence, we have to demand it. as a specialty.
True.
You know, so if you stop using a product because it doesn't have evidence, you know what? The real smart business people in these companies will find the money to do get the evidence, so they can get sales, and that's the way it should be.
Right. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it always, I like to play devil's advocate, so to speak. And so again, these companies that don't want to do it with their products, to me, should immediately cause pause. What are they afraid of? Anacapa took a big risk, as you mentioned. They put it all on the line. They're like, hey, we don't have no idea how this study is going to turn out. It's done by somebody else. We're not doing it ourselves. The bias studies, and you put everything on the game out there, and you're gonna sink or swim. And I applaud a company that's willing to take that risk. But to know that, I think going into it, because I know the owners, I've met them over the years. I've got friendships, colleagueships with the owner, Dr. Roginski, that owns the company and stuff like that. And he believes that his product actually works, and that's why I think he probably had hardly any hesitancy about doing this study, because he's like, no, it's just going to prove what I believe.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And one thing I always question is if someone comes up to me and says, here's a product, it looks just like this one. Why don't you go ahead and use it? We don't have any evidence, but they have evidence. I think that's disingenuous. I
agree.
Products, if you believe your product works, mm-hmm. then test it, prove it.
Right.
And I think you're right, Bill. If you're afraid, if a company comes in, they're afraid to do a clinical trial, you have to wonder why.
Right.
What do they know? What have they done?
Sure.
In the past, testing wise, that puts doubt in their mind about whether that product really works or not.
Exactly.
So, I think you've got to put your evidence out there, mm-hmm. and then let everybody. Then they can compete. That's their job. Right, our job is to look at the evidence and heal patients.
Sure, exactly. For example, there's no doubt, evidentiary wise, that the chemical ingredient hypochlorous acid is antimicrobial. But just because you put a splash of it in your cleanser doesn't mean that it works as well as the hypochlorous acid in the study they did that wasn't your product, But they ride on those coattails, like you mentioned. They're like, well, we've got this, there's these studies on hypochlorous acid. Yeah, but is the study specifically on your product, your concentration of the agent, and how it was formulated, or is it just somebody else's with the same quote unquote ingredient? Doesn't mean they all perform the same,
Yeah, and what's the situation? So what's the end point, and what's the situation for the trial? And we spend an enormous amount of time on clinical trial design, and that's essential. The way the trials are conducted, the way they're run, is really, wound care didn't have clinical trial design 20 years ago.
Right.
It's all new. This is all new.
Sure.
And, I must say, one of the things that's my fault is we haven't published enough on clinical trial design. We've started doing a lot more this year. And Vicki Driver and I are getting ready to publish one on diabetic foot ulcers. And we're going to also publish this Antisept clinical trial design. Mm-hmm. And because if we want to compare products, you really can't compare products unless you do head-to-head or unless their clinical trial designs are equivalent. Then you can really do a head-to-head comparison, do comparative effectiveness, but you can't otherwise. It doesn't. It's not fair. Right. So I think that I think that the clinical trial design is something that's really come a long way in 20 years, and now we can really use those designs mm-hmm. to make to get the results, or to really trial the products.
Right.
Do I think hypochlorous is going to perform well in the trial? Yeah, I do, but I'd like to see it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like, I go back to the whole Dakins thing, and which is, it's been around for 106 years now. And even the company, and again, no disrespect to the company, there's a company out there, Century Pharmaceuticals, that makes commercial grade Dakins. They're the only company that actually commercially produces it. But they actually have a paper that they published that admits right in there there's no clinical evidence that it's ever been tested in wounds. Yet everybody thinks it's this antimicrobial or nuclear bomb when you put it in the wound. Yet the company that makes it's like, yeah, we probably should do some evidence, some research, because nobody's done any in 106 years.
Yeah, so that's interesting about Dakins because we had one of our investigators in the Hypochlorite device trial. Lot was a Dakins fan, and he there was now this is a very small number, so you have to take this is anecdotal, so take it for what it's worth. But he had a number of patients that we imaged who were actively receiving Dakins, and the wounds lit up like a Christmas tree, red everywhere, lots of bacteria, and it really it was these kinds of things that you see. They think, wow. And he was shocked. He was just, he was like, there's something wrong with that device. Check the
settings. Around a little bit. It's not working right.
What's wrong with this thing? And, but it was eye-opening. It was really eye-opening to see that, that something is powerful that not only is toxic, but also it didn't really work all that well. It's, the preparation, as you mentioned earlier, is really important. And, Antiseptic is a modified sodium hypochlorite, and that preparation, which is years in the making to get it just right, and now we have in vivo evidence in a double-blind fashion that it's very effective.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we got a few questions that came in from the audience while I've got you on here, Dr. Serena. Just curious, you may or may not be able, if you don't know, that's perfectly fine. There's one that somebody asked how it was different than a product called Except. I don't know if you're familiar with EXSEPT or not. So is there a difference between Antisept and Except?
There's a difference in the preparation for sure. Now, I'm not a chemist again. I'm not going to admit to be a chemist, so I can't give you great details on that. I've never studied Except in any clinical trial setting. So from that point, I'm fairly ignorant about it. But I know that the sort of magic of the Antisept is the modification of the sodium hypochlorite and what happens when you put it in the wound.
Right. I mean,
and that's the key thing. What happens when you put it in the wound?
Right.
I don't know if you're more familiar with the product.
I am familiar with the product. I've looked into it before because I'm kind of, I've got a reputation as the antimicrobial guy. And I do my due diligence on the products because I get the questions all the time. Well, what about this? I've used, you say Antisept is, but we're using a product called Vosh, or we're using a product called Puricin, or we're using these other products, which are perfectly fine wound cleansers. But they ask, well, are they just as antimicrobial? And I said, well, let's look at what the company's literature says. And I'm almost 100% positive on the Except that their 510K clearance from the FDA simply states that their sodium hypochlorite, hypochlorous acid content only acts as a preservative within the solution. Well, that's very telling because the FDA says it's just a preservative. We should not then assume, well, that's just the FDA. It's got to work because, I believe it works. So that much I can tell about the Except. It's also, I believe it's got a much lower concentration of, if it's got sodium hypochlorite, which I think it does, but it's even a more diluted version of what even Antisept has as a concentration. So.
Well, glad you knew all that, Bill. That's great. You're amazing. So, I think that this goes to the fact that I mentioned previously that we allow this. We've been using all these antiseptics without good clinical trial evidence, and now that and a lot of that had to do because it was really hard to do the trials before. You had to do quantitative biopsies. You take these great big hunks of tissue out. Patients don't want to volunteer for that. Now we have a device that can. Now we have a device that makes these trials very quick and easy and non-invasive to conduct. So I think I'm going to look to where the evidence goes and evidence in vivo. I want to now Antisept has in vivo evidence. We'd love to do a trial in Except.
Yeah. So I got a question I'm going to take real quick from a gal we've got someone who's tuned in from Ghana. Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting when we got international people tuning in. It always just kind of warms my heart that we have more than just a U.S. audience. She asked about how to get a sample of the Anisept. I'm not going to try to pronounce your name because I'm going to butcher it, ma'am. So I would just reach out to Anacapa, ANACAPA Technologies, and you can request a sample from their website or contact them and see if they can send something your way. So I've got another one here that I'm going to let you handle. It says, doctors want to use Anisept and betadine. How do we approach this?
Well, okay, let's go back to value, right? So, where's the evidence for betadine? There isn't any.
Right.
There's the in vivo evidence is that it's harmful to fibroblasts, mammalian fibroblasts. So I think there's if you're going to follow an evidence-based algorithm, you're not going to use the betadine at all. So you can take that out of the equation. But we have good in vivo and in vitro evidence for Anisept.
Right.
And you know what? If you look at the clinical trial that we just did, you don't need the betadine. Why do it? Why expose? Why take the risk of increased toxicity?
Sure.
When you don't have to.
Sure.
So good luck on that one, though.
Right.
Because there's still a bunch of old surgeons like me that like betadine still.
Yeah, and I like to tell my students,
I don't like betadine, but people my age.
Yeah, I always tell my students it's real simple. Read the label on a bottle of betadine. It never says anywhere it's indicated for full thickness wounds. It's for skin cleansing and partial thickness first aid wounds. It is not a full thickness wound treatment. So using it, period, just makes it off-label use. Why take the risk? Plus, it's cytotoxic issues and all the other stuff. I'm like, it's like you said, value and legal risks. I mean, to me, it's a check, boom, boom. Not even worth going that route. So, another question: are there any studies comparing Anisept to other cleansers, or just compared to saline currently?
Just to saline currently, and then, like I said, Anisept is really Anacapa is really the leader here in as far as research is concerned. They've really taken charge and in studying it in the disease state. I think there's going to be a lot more coming after this because now they've set the bar, and then wouldn't it be great fun to compare them head to head?
Sure.
So we actually have one of those in design right now that you were looking at, and where we're going to do a head-to-head comparison.
Nice.
And it's that's all I can say about that. That's all I can say about that right now.
We'll have you back on when that study's done.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any other questions at this point coming in from the audience. I do want to quick put up your contact information if anybody would like to reach out to Dr. Serena. He did say you could put up his email address so you can reach him at serenagroups with an S.com. So if you have any questions, maybe about his study that he's still ongoing in, or what he's kind of found using this modified sodium hypochlorite product that we know is Anisept out there, he's more than happy to field any questions out there. So we appreciate that. So, take a screenshot or write it down here real quick. And then basically, Doc, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, obviously, with all that you've got going on with Serena Group. I can only imagine what the time constraints can be. So I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to share. I think this was revolutionary and groundbreaking clinical evidence that can really help our clinicians make better choices for products going forward. And we can only hope that more and more companies will be willing to put their reputation on the line and do more types of studies like this with your organization or with some organization, so that we can really have that clinical evidence to really support the products that we're using every day, and not just wasting money on stuff we think works, but we really don't know. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with our audience. So any last final words you want to say before I let you go?
No, it's been my pleasure, Bill. Thank you. And I do want to encourage folks, if you're interested in getting involved in these research efforts, we certainly need more people. I mean, we need more people doing this type of work, it's gotten a lot easier. I mean, I have to, when we first started these trials, bacterial trials, as you know, Bill, it was tough. I mean, it's hard doing quantitative biopsies, finding the right labs.
Right.
So it can really be a challenge. It's gotten a lot easier, and you don't have to be at a major academic institution to do this type of work if you like it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the way we're going to advance the science of wound healing.
Amen. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Doc. You have a wonderful evening. It was great chatting with you, and we will look forward to bringing you back on with some future studies when you get those done. So thank you again, sir. You have yourself a wonderful evening.
Have a great evening. Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, everybody, that was kind of concludes tonight's interview. I want to thank you all of you that tuned in tonight. I hope you found this information helpful and maybe making some decisions going forward. Gina, your question is I would reach out to Dr. Serena directly. You got his email, and if you want to participate in a trial or case study, sure that he can help you out with that and give you some direction on that. But anyways, folks, I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. It was another great week, and we will look forward to seeing you in some up and coming webinars and Facebook Lives that we will be doing. So this is Bill Richland signing off from Wound Care Gurus. You guys all have an excellent evening.